Picture this. It's Monday night, September 5th, 1983. Millions of Americans are sitting in their living rooms watching their favorite weekly tradition. Monday Night Football has become more than just a game. It's appointment television. Families gather around their TV sets, sharing snacks and cheering for their teams. And at the center of it all is a man with a thick New York accent, wearing his famous toupee, delivering commentary that makes people either love him or hate him. His name is Howard Cosell, and he has no idea that in just a few minutes, he's about to say something that will change his life forever. What happened that night wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was the beginning of the end for one of the most famous voices in sports history. And the crazy part? The truth about what really happened is way more complicated than most people think. Howard William Cohen was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but his family moved to Brooklyn when he was just a little kid. Growing up in New York during the Great Depression wasn't easy for anyone, but Howard had something special. He had a voice that demanded attention and opinions that he wasn't afraid to share. Even as a young boy, he knew he wanted to be heard. After serving in the military during World War II, Howard went to law school and became a successful lawyer. But sports kept calling to him. He started doing radio shows about boxing and baseball in his spare time, interviewing athletes and giving his honest opinions about what was happening in the sports world. By the 1950s, he had completely changed his name from Howard Cohen to Howard Cosell, and he was ready to take on the world of sports broadcasting. But Howard wasn't like other sports announcers. Most broadcasters in those days were cheerleaders. They would describe the action and always stay positive, never criticizing players or teams. The poi were safe, predictable, and frankly, kind of boring. Howard was different. He had a motto that would make him famous and also make him a lot of enemies. He promised to tell it like it is. This meant that if a player was having a bad game, Howard would say so. If a coach made a stupid decision, Howard would call it out. If there was corruption or unfairness in sports, Howard would talk about it on the air. This was revolutionary for its time, and it made him incredibly popular with fans who were tired of sugar-coated sports coverage. Howard's big break came when he started covering boxing matches. This was during an amazing time in boxing history when larger-than-life fighters were becoming household names. And the biggest name of all was a young, loud, confident boxer named Cassius Clay, who would later change his name to Muhammad Ali. The friendship between Howard Cosell and Muhammad Ali became legendary. They were both from different backgrounds. Howard was a Jewish lawyer from Brooklyn, and Ali was a black Muslim boxer from Louisville, Kentucky. But they understood each other perfectly. They both loved attention. They both spoke their minds. And they both weren't afraid of controversy. When Ali refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War and was stripped of his boxing titles, most sports reporters turned their backs on him. The government and many Americans saw Ali as unpatriotic, and supporting him could have been career suicide for a broadcaster. But Howard stood by his friend. He argued on television that Ali had the right to his religious and political beliefs. He fought for Ali's return to boxing when it seemed impossible. This loyalty made Howard a hero to many people, especially in the black community. Here was a white broadcaster who was willing to risk his career to defend a black athlete's rights. Howard's support helped keep Ali's name in the public eye during his 3-year ban from boxing, and when Ali finally returned to the ring, their friendship was stronger than ever. By the 1970s, Howard had become the most recognizable voice in sports. When ABC launched Monday Night Football in 1970, they knew they needed someone special to make it work. Football games on weekday nights had never been successful before, but ABC had a crazy idea. Instead of just showing the game, they would make it entertainment. They put together a 3-man broadcasting team that was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. There was Frank Gifford, the former football star who was handsome and smooth. There was Don Meredith, the former Dallas Cowboys quarterback who was funny and folksy. And then there was Howard Cosell, the lawyer from Brooklyn who didn't know much about football but knew everything about creating drama and keeping people interested. The combination was magic. Monday Night Football became must-see television. People who didn't even like football would tune in just to hear what Howard would say next. He would criticize referees, question coaching decisions, and share gossip about players' personal lives. He made football feel important and exciting in a way it never had before. Howard's catchphrases became part of American culture. When he would dramatically announce, "Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier," during a boxing match, people would repeat it for years afterward. His nasal voice and over-the-top delivery made him easy to imitate, and comedians on Saturday Night Live would regularly make fun of him, which only made him more famous. But with great fame came great criticism. Howard received thousands of hate letters every week. People called him arrogant, obnoxious, and much worse. Some of the criticism was clearly motivated by anti-Semitism, as people would attack him for being Jewish. But Howard seemed to thrive on the controversy. He once said, "I've been called arrogant, pompous, obnoxious, vain, cruel, verbose, and a show-off. And of course, I am." The hate mail didn't slow him down. If anything, it seemed to fuel him. Howard believed that getting people emotional, even if they hated him, was better than boring them. He was probably right. Monday Night Football's ratings were incredible, and Howard was a big reason why. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Howard was at the peak of his powers. He was covering the biggest boxing matches, hosting his own variety show, and remaining the most controversial voice on Monday Night Football. He seemed unstoppable. But success in television is fragile, and one wrong word can change everything. The night that changed Howard's life started like any other Monday Night Football broadcast. The Dallas Cowboys were playing the Washington Redskins at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. It was early in the 1983 season, and both teams were looking good. The Redskins had taken a big lead by halftime, 23-3, and their offense was clicking on all cylinders. One of the players having a great game for Washington was a wide receiver named Alvin Garrett. Garrett was small and quick, the kind of player who could make big plays in tight spaces. He was also African American, which becomes important to the story. During the first half, the broadcast showed an instant replay of Garrett making a nice catch and running for extra yards. As the replay rolled, Howard did what he always did. He provided colorful commentary to go along with the action. But this time, his choice of words would haunt him for the rest of his life. Watching Garrett dodge tacklers and race down the field, Howard said into his microphone, "That little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" It was said casually, almost throwaway, the kind of comment that might normally be forgotten as soon as the next play started. But this wasn't going to be forgotten. Almost immediately, phone calls started pouring into ABC's offices and newspaper sports desks. Viewers were outraged. To them, Howard had just called a black football player a monkey, and in 1983 America, everyone understood the racist implications of that comparison. The phones didn't stop ringing all night. The Washington Post, which had recorded the entire broadcast, confirmed exactly what Howard had said. There was no denying it, no claiming that people had misheard. The words were right there on tape for everyone to hear. The reaction was swift and intense. The Reverend Joseph Lowry, who was the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at the time, publicly denounced Howard's comment as racist and demanded a public apology. Newspaper editorial writers across the country weighed in, with most condemning what they saw as a clear racial slur broadcast to millions of viewers. But here's where the story gets complicated, and where the truth becomes much more interesting than the simple narrative that most people remember. Howard was genuinely shocked by the reaction. He had no idea that his comment would be interpreted as racist, and he was hurt and confused by the accusations. You see, Howard had been using the phrase "little monkey" to describe small, quick players for years. He had called white players the same thing many times before, and no one had ever complained. In fact, researchers who went back and looked at old broadcasts found multiple examples of Howard using similar language to describe white athletes. He had called white boxers little monkeys when they were quick and elusive. He had used the phrase to describe white football players who reminded him of energetic children. To Howard, it was just a way of saying that a small player was active and hard to catch. The problem was context and timing. In 1983, America was still dealing with the legacy of centuries of racism, including the long history of comparing black people to monkeys and apes as a way of dehumanizing them. Even if Howard didn't mean it that way, and even if he had used the same phrase to describe white players, saying it about a black player on national television was bound to cause problems. Howard's defenders pointed out his long history of supporting black athletes, especially Muhammad Ali. They argued that a man who had risked his career to defend Ali's rights during the Vietnam War era couldn't possibly be racist. Jesse Jackson, the famous civil rights leader, even came to Howard's defense, saying that people who knew Howard understood that he wasn't a racist. But Howard's supporters weren't enough to stop the growing controversy. The story became national news, appearing in newspapers and on television shows across the country. Howard found himself in the strange position of being called a racist by people who had never met him, while some of his closest friends in the sports world, many of whom were black, continued to support him. The stress of the controversy was enormous. Howard had always been sensitive to criticism, despite his tough public image. He had grown up facing anti-Semitism, and throughout his career he had received hate mail that often included both racial and religious slurs. Now he was being accused of the same kind of prejudice that had been directed at him. ABC stood by Howard initially, but the network executives were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Monday Night Football was one of their most important programs, and they couldn't afford to have it associated with racial controversy. They began pressuring Howard to be more careful with his language, which frustrated him because he felt he was being treated unfairly. The incident also came at a time when Howard was already becoming disillusioned with football. He had been complaining privately that the sport had become too violent and that the business side was taking over from the pure competition he loved. The little monkey controversy gave him another reason to consider whether he wanted to continue with Monday Night Football. As the 1983 season continued, Howard tried to put the controversy behind him and focus on his job. But the criticism didn't stop. Every game brought new scrutiny of his comments, and he felt like he was walking on eggshells every time he spoke into the microphone. The joy he had once felt calling football games was disappearing. Behind the scenes, ABC executives were having discussions about Howard's future with Monday Night Football. While they publicly supported him, privately they were concerned about the negative publicity and the potential impact on ratings and advertising revenue, Television is ultimately a business, and controversy that doesn't translate into higher profits is seen as a liability. Howard could sense the changing atmosphere. The man who had once thrived on controversy was now finding that this particular controversy was different. It wasn't the kind of attention he wanted, and it wasn't helping his career. For the first time in years, Howard Cosell felt vulnerable. As the 1983 season wound down, Howard made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He announced that he would be leaving Monday Night Football at the end of the season. Officially, he said that professional football had become a stagnant bore, and that he wanted to move on to other projects. But everyone in the industry understood that the little monkey controversy had played a major role in his decision. The announcement sent shockwaves through the sports world. Howard Cosell without Monday Night Football was like Muhammad Ali without boxing, or like television without commercials. It seemed impossible to imagine one without the other. For 13 years, Howard had been the voice that defined Monday night television for millions of Americans. His last Monday Night Football broadcast was on December 5, 1983. It was an emotional moment for Howard, though he tried not to show it. He had helped create something special, and now he was walking away from it. The era of Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football was officially over. But the story doesn't end there. Howard continued working for ABC, covering boxing matches and hosting other programs. However, he was never quite the same. The little monkey incident had shaken his confidence in a way that previous controversies never had. He became more cautious in his commentary, which took away some of the spark that had made him special. The incident also highlighted the complex relationship between sports, media, and race in America. Howard's case showed how language that might seem innocent in one context could be deeply offensive in another. It demonstrated the ongoing sensitivity around racial issues in American society, and how quickly a successful career could be derailed by a single moment of poor judgment, even if that judgment wasn't intentionally malicious. In the years that followed, Monday Night Football continued without Howard, but it was never quite the same. The new announcers were more professional, more polished, and much more boring. They didn't take risks, didn't create controversy, and didn't generate the water cooler conversations that Howard had inspired for over a decade. Howard himself became increasingly bitter about his treatment by the media and the public. He felt that his decades of supporting civil rights and breaking down barriers in sports broadcasting had been forgotten because of one unfortunate phrase. In interviews later in life, he would express frustration that people remembered the little monkey incident more than his groundbreaking coverage of Muhammad Ali or his role in making Monday Night Football a cultural phenomenon. The truth about that night in 1983 is more nuanced than most people realize. Howard Cosell wasn't fired immediately after his controversial comment, as many people believe. He finished out the season and then chose to leave Monday Night Football, though the controversy certainly influenced his decision. He wasn't necessarily a racist, as his long history of supporting black athletes demonstrated, but he also wasn't entirely innocent, as his choice of words showed a lack of awareness about how his comments might be interpreted. What happened to Howard Cosell serves as a reminder of how quickly things can change in the world of television and sports. One moment, you can be at the top of your profession, beloved by millions and feared by your competitors. The next moment, a single sentence can change everything, turning friends into critics and making your greatest strengths seem like weaknesses. The incident also shows how America was changing in the 1980s. The civil rights movement had made significant progress, but racial tensions were still very real. Public figures were being held to higher standards when it came to language and behavior around issues of race. What might have been overlooked or forgotten in earlier decades was now being scrutinized and criticized. Howard Cosell continued working in television for several more years after leaving Monday Night Football, but he never regained the prominence he had once enjoyed. He covered boxing matches and hosted talk shows, but the magic was gone. The man who had once seemed larger than life now seemed smaller, more careful, and less confident. He published books about his career and gave interviews where he tried to set the record straight about various controversies, including the little monkey incident. But the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict, and Howard found it difficult to change people's minds. He had spent his career telling it like it was, but when it came to his own story, he discovered that the truth was more complicated than most people wanted to hear. Howard Cosell died in 1995, 12 years after that fateful Monday night in Washington. His obituaries mentioned his groundbreaking work in sports broadcasting, his friendship with Muhammad Ali, and his role in making Monday Night Football a success. But they also mentioned the little monkey controversy, ensuring that this single moment would be part of his legacy forever. The story of Howard Cosell's fall from grace is ultimately a story about the power of words and the fragility of reputation. It's about how quickly public opinion can change, and how a lifetime of work can be overshadowed by a single mistake. It's also about the ongoing struggle with race relations in America, and how even well-meaning people can find themselves caught up in controversies they never intended to create. Today, more than 40 years later, sports broadcasting is very different from what it was during Howard's era. Announcers are more careful, more corporate, and much less likely to take the kinds of risks that made Howard famous. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on your perspective, but there's no doubt that television has lost some of its spontaneity and unpredictability. The lessons from Howard Cosell's career are still relevant today. In an age of social media and instant communication, public figures must be even more careful about their words and actions. A single tweet or comment can go viral in minutes, reaching millions of people and potentially ending careers. The stakes are higher than ever, and the margin for error is smaller. But Howard's story also reminds us of the importance of context and nuance. Not every controversial statement is motivated by malice, and not every mistake deserves to end someone's career. Sometimes good people say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and sometimes the reaction is more severe than the offense deserves. Howard Cosell was a complex figure who changed sports broadcasting forever. He broke down barriers, challenged conventions, and made television more interesting and dynamic. He also made mistakes, including that fateful comment on a September night in 1983 that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Whether you see Howard as a victim of political correctness or as someone who got what he deserved probably depends on your own views about race, media, and accountability. But there's no denying that his rise and fall tells us something important about American society, about the power of television, and about how quickly fame can turn into infamy. The next time you're watching Monday Night Football, remember the man who helped create it all. Remember Howard Cosell, the lawyer from Brooklyn who promised to tell it like it was, and who discovered that sometimes the truth is more complicated than anyone wants to admit. His voice may be gone, but the questions his career raised about sports, race, and media are still with us today. So what do you think? Was Howard Cosell treated fairly, or was he the victim of a rush to judgment? Should one controversial comment overshadow decades of groundbreaking work? These are the kinds of questions that don't have easy answers, but they're worth thinking about as we continue to grapple with issues of race, language, and accountability in our society. If this story got you thinking about the complex relationship between sports, media, and society, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories from the world of sports history. There are so many incredible tales of triumph, controversy, and human drama waiting to be told, and we're just getting started. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.